Hey there guys, I hope you're doing well. Today, I'm going to be ranking each of the major Wings of Fire queens. We are going to find out who's the best queen and who is the worst. I will be judging them based on 4 different categories. The first category is fairness, which is based on whether or not she treats dragons as equals and follows the rules of the kingdom, her openness to feedback, and how much she uses her power to improve the kingdom. The second category is wisdom, which is based on whether or not she is intelligent, disciplined, empathetic, and knowledgeable. The third category is charisma, which is based on how much her subjects like her in general, and also her ability to make alliances with other tribes. And finally, the last category is competence, which is based on how well she runs her kingdom, how well she treats her subjects, and how successful she is in war, if applicable. And for each category, I will be giving each queen a rating out of 10. A 0 to 3 means that the queen is bad in that regard. A 4 to 6 means that they are okay but could definitely improve. A 7 to 8 means that the queen is good, and a 9 to 10 would mean that the queen is nearly perfect in that category. After I decide the 4 ratings for each queen, I will average the ratings out and they will be put in a tier list. These are what scores will be put in each tier. It is worth noting that many of these categories will overlap with each other, so if a queen has a low rating, then it's likely that the other categories will also have low ratings as well. Also, many queens have been excluded because we simply don't have enough information about their characters to at least make a prediction of how they might have ruled their kingdom. We will be going through the queens by tribe, so we are going to be starting with the Skywing queens. Before going into each category for the queen, I will also be providing a short bio on the queen for context. So, shall we begin? With the Skywings, we're going to start off with the infamous Queen Scarlet, who was the Skywing Queen during the Dragonet Prophecy. She ended up meeting her demise during Book 8, but still had a huge impact on the Sky Kingdom. She was known for her notorious battle arena, where many dragons died during the war. She was also known to be very ruthless and cruel. So we're going to be starting off with how fair Queen Scarlet is. Now, Queen Scarlet definitely thinks very highly of herself and therefore kind of treats all her subjects like dirt. But she doesn't ignore them, as she knows that they're essential to her kingdom. She holds trials for when she wants to punish one of her subjects, but they are rigged. The only reason why she does them is so that she appears to be fair. Now, that does tell us that she somewhat cares about her public perception, so to her, her subjects are not completely unimportant to her. In fact, she killed Osprey for doing his job too well. He was supposed to be the defense in Kestrel's trial, and the evidence was stacked up against Scarlet, so she just killed him and found Kestrel guilty anyways. One terrible thing about Queen Scarlet is that she kills anyone who criticizes or disobeys her. Now, if someone disobeys the queen, it's reasonable for them to be punished for treason. But Queen Scarlet's answer is always death, and in most, if not all cases, that is not at all a fair punishment. So based on all this, I will give Scarlet a 0. She definitely does not care about the fairness in her kingdom, and she just wants what benefits her most. In terms of wisdom, Scarlet is not dumb, but she also isn't smart. If she were really dumb, she wouldn't have been able to find the dragonets in their cave, but she also tends to put entertainment before completing her goals, which we have seen backfire on her, like when she captured the dragonets but insisted on having them in her arena, which led to them surviving long enough to escape. Nothing bad would have happened to her if she had just killed them in the cave. Well, of course, it's a good thing that she's not smart about getting things done, but if her goals were good and were to help the kingdom, then this would be a huge disadvantage for the Skywings. She also doesn't like to rely on other dragons. A wise dragon would realize that even if dragons have disappointed you in the past, you shouldn't completely block out the possibility because they can still be very helpful. You just need to be mindful about who you trust. So overall, she is getting a 2.5. Like I said, not crazy dumb, but not smart either. For charisma, Queen Scarlet is not very nice and not very charismatic at all. In fact, her whole thing is being kind of intimidating. She mainly gets what she wants through threats, and definitely not by charm. I especially don't like how she says things in a sarcastic and dramatic tone, like, "Oh, how thrilling this battle is," or something like that. Of course, her way of speaking doesn't really impact the kingdom directly, but it makes her as a dragon seem a bit more obnoxious depending on who you ask, and therefore it could make it more difficult for her to make alliances. Clearly the Skywings respected her, because if they didn't she would kill them, but at least her intimidation lets things get done in the kingdom and get some productivity, and I have to give her some credit for that, even if it's not the way I would go about it personally. So for charisma, I'm going to give her a 2. Now we are on to the final category for Scarlet, and that is competence. I actually think that Queen Scarlet is fairly competent as a queen, honestly. During the Dragonette Prophecy, we see that she is running a functional kingdom. Dragons are being productive, things are getting done, despite her tyrannical way of ruling things. Now, of course, she puts far too much attention into her battle arena. All the dragons that watch the battles could be doing something more productive for the kingdom rather than shouting death at the poor prisoners. I don't think it makes a huge difference, but I think small things like that are really what bring Scarlet's way of ruling down a few points for me. Another thing I'll add to this is how she treats her subjects very poorly, which definitely holds her back. So I will give her a 5. I don't agree with how she goes about it, but I need to be honest with myself. During Scarlet's rule, it was definitely a functional kingdom. There's no denying that. So if we average out all these scores, we get 2.375, which places her in the lower half of the D rank. The second and final Skywing Queen that we will be looking at is Queen Ruby. She is Queen Scarlet's daughter, well, Tourmaline is, and the dragon who took over as queen when Scarlet went missing after the Dragonettes of Destiny escaped. She has been queen since the events of the Lost Heir at least, and we see most of her character in the changes she made to the kingdom during escaping peril. Based on what we have seen, she is actually a very good queen, and I bet a huge breath of fresh air for the Skywings. So once again, we are starting with fairness. Ruby seems to genuinely care about her tribe, and it shows because she put the energy and the palace's abundance of gold into creating a hospital for wounded soldiers during the war. She also treats her guards with respect and follows the laws of her kingdom. The only thing I'm a little bit on the fence about with her is how she banished Peril. Of course, she let Peril in eventually, but she seemed pretty adamant on not letting her. Like I said, I'm on the fence, so I don't know if this is the right decision or not. If we look at this on the surface, Peril killed many dragons with little to no remorse, so I guess I think it's reasonable for Ruby to banish her, but I don't know for sure. I think this would make a great topic for discussion, so if I ever do that, I'll come to my final conclusion about it then, but for now, I think I'll say that it's fair for Ruby to do that. I think that Ruby is a very fair and generous queen, so I will give her a solid 9. The only reason why I won't give her a 10 is because I think she was a little bit close-minded on the idea that Peril could improve as a dragon, which was a bit frustrating and unfair to Peril, but I can see where Ruby was coming from. Now we are going on to Wisdom. Now, Ruby is a fairly young queen, but I think that she will get even better and smarter as time goes on. But based on the changes she has made so far, she has already proven to already be a very wise dragon. Going back to how she built the hospital, that first of all was a very smart decision, but also likely required a lot of planning and sacrifice. The sacrifice is all the gold that it took. I know that dragons kind of instinctually love treasure, but there's hardly a point in it, and I think that if a dragon can recognize that, it indicates at least some level of wisdom. Ruby also demonstrates her being careful when she is trying to save Cliff from Queen Scarlet by not doing anything too rash. If she had just attacked Scarlet without thinking while Cliff was in her clutches, he likely would have been killed. I don't know that Ruby has really shown any sign of stupidity at all, so I'm gonna give her a 9.5. For charisma, I think that the Skywings quite like her. Heck, even Vermilion, who is very loyal to Scarlet, switched to Ruby's side. This is a very important example because Vermilion was loyal to Scarlet out of fear, and him immediately accepting Ruby as queen despite being so apparently loyal to Scarlet shows that she is probably very likable to the Skywings. Of course, he could be loyal because he is also afraid of Ruby, but I think that's very unlike Ruby's character. And I'm sure that the Skywings generally do prefer Ruby more at least, seeing as she doesn't support killing a lot of dragons for no good reason. They likely are far less fearful now than during Scarlet's reign. So I'm going to be giving Ruby an 8 for charisma. And the final category for Ruby is competence, and I've said most of what I need to say already, so I will just keep it brief. I think that her using the gold in the palace to go towards helping wounded dragons shows a lot of competence in how much she would sacrifice towards her dragons, and also helping the wounded dragons would lead to a stronger kingdom. She also with all the chaos in the Sky Kingdom, managed to get everything under control fairly quickly, despite being rather young and having little experience. With all that said, I'm going to give her a rating of 10 for competence. I think she is very, very competent. So now I'm going to average out all these scores, and she gets a rating of 9.125, placing her in low S tier. The first Rainwing Queen that we will be looking at is Grandeur. Grandeur mainly appears in the Hidden Kingdom, and she comes off as wise, intelligent, fairly competent, and a dragon who has integrity. While we don't get a ton of her character, we do see a lot of it during Glory's challenge for the throne when she forfeits because she believes that Glory would make a good queen, which, as you will see soon, ended up being a wise decision. So with all that said, let's go into the categories. For fairness, I'm going to give her a 7. She saw how Glory was going to lose unfairly to the other queens, and since she believed that Glory would make a great queen, she forfeited in order to let Glory win fair and square. This shows that she believes in fairness and is committed to following the laws of the kingdom. The only reason why I won't rank her higher is because she was mentioned to not take feedback from the members of the tribe during her turns as queen. Now, that could be because the requests she was receiving weren't productive, but if Glory had come with the news about missing Rainwings and she wasn't able to talk to Grandeur, then that is very problematic. But in general, I would say that she seemed pretty reasonable and I can understand her decisions. I will give Grandeur another 7 for wisdom. While she is definitely like the old wise dragon in the series, I think that the one decision to make the queens rotate was a rather dumb and short-sighted decision, and it matters a lot to the ranking because it affected the tribe in a very negative way. If she thought about the potential consequences of that idea, perhaps she could have thought a bit more and came up with a better solution. Other than that instance, I would say that Grandeur is generally pretty wise and just a strong presence in general, so I'm going to give her a 7. Not much really has to be said about charisma, honestly. While she is old and wise, she can also sometimes come off as a bit grumpy. During her times as queen, she also did not allow dragons to talk to her for very long compared to the other queens. These factors led to her being disliked by many of the Rainwings. That's why I'm going to give her a 3. It's not lower because it's not like dragons fear for their safety around her. She just isn't very well liked by the Rainwings, and I honestly don't like her a ton either. She is certainly more likable than the other Rainwing queens, but that is an extremely low bar, so it just isn't enough. I think a good queen should be well liked by her subjects, otherwise she's probably doing something wrong. Finally, I will be giving her a 6 in competence because she seems to mostly know what she is doing. But then again, with that one decision to make that rotation system, that was just a really bad idea, because it resulted in the queens essentially becoming jokes, and nothing was getting done in the Rainforest Kingdom. All these scores averaged out give Grandeur a score of 5.75, which places her in the high C column. Now we're going to move on to Queen Glory. Glory is one of the Dragonettes of Destiny, and she became queen during the Hidden Kingdom in order to help the Rainwings that were being kidnapped by the Nightwings. After saving the Rainwings, the Nightwing Island's volcano exploded, and Glory was kind enough to let them stay in another region of the rainforest. So now, she's the queen of both the Nightwings and the Rainwings. Once again, we're starting with fairness, and I'll say right off the bat, Glory might be the most fair queen ever. She always makes sure that the dragons she's punishing are getting punished in a fair way. For example, she punished Mastermind with quicksand, which is very untraditional, but she felt was appropriate, so she did that. Glory also always treats her subjects and other dragons with respect, as the power has not gone to her head. She always tries to make peace with other tribes, and it often proves successful. So I will be giving Glory a 10 for the fairness category. I honestly don't see how she could be more fair than she is right now. And for wisdom, I will be giving her a 9.5 due to her ability to make alliances with other tribes and also her ability to think situations through. Her wisdom and decision-making skills have changed the Rainwing and Nightwing tribes for the better. For example, she made sure that Egg's work had track of so that no Rainwing would have to go through what she went through, and she also acted intelligently during the hunt for Icicle in Book 7 because they were able to successfully capture Icicle without too many problems, even if it wasn't the way that Winter wanted. The only reason why she isn't getting a 10 is because she is still a Dragonette. While she is already very wise for her age, I think it is possible for her to become even wiser as she grows both as a dragon and a queen. For charisma, I think that Glory deserves a 10 because I think she has found just the right balance between authority and friendliness to where dragons aren't afraid to talk to her, but they also have a lot of respect for her. While the Nightwings might not like her as much as the Rainwings, I'm still gonna give her a 10 because that is simply not her fault. She's done all she can for the Nightwings, and some of them just don't recognize that yet. And finally, competence. I think Glory also deserves a 10 because she was able to successfully run 2 separate tribes, which hadn't been seen before as a dragonette. That by itself is a huge accomplishment. She also managed to restructure the Rainwing society so that it doesn't support laziness as much by giving Rainwings jobs and purpose. She was able to successfully rescue all the missing Rainwings apart from the ones that died, something that the previous queens wouldn't and probably couldn't do. So if we average out the scores, we get 9.875, placed very high up in S tier. She is probably the best queen that Pyria is ever gonna see. Now we will move on to Magnificent, who, like Grandeur, was one of the former Rainwing queens that took turns. Magnificent is interesting because during the Hidden Kingdom, she is on her turn as queen, so we do get to see a bit of her character and how she runs the kingdom. Needless to say, she's not great. She and Grandeur are the only Rainwing queens apart from Glory that we will be looking at because we don't see much of the other Rainwing queens in the series. For the fairness category, Magnificent is frustratingly ignorant and just does not care about the Rainwings one bit. It's not like she's different from any of the other Rainwings, but that's still no excuse. She allows Rainwings to come to her with her problems, but she doesn't care and doesn't do anything about it. In fact, after Glory came back to her about finding out where the Rainwings were being kidnapped to, Magnificent didn't even remember that this was an issue despite Glory telling her about it. The only thing she was glad about was how Mangrove would stop bothering her. So she is clearly very selfish and does not care at all about the Rainwings. So I think I will give her a reasonable rating of 2. The only reason why she doesn't get a 1 is because she doesn't go around killing dragons, but that's also kind of the bare minimum for being a somewhat decent dragon. For wisdom, there's not much to say. She's just straight up stupid, nothing smart about her at all. She's not intelligent and she doesn't care about others or want to help others. The only knowledge she has is how to organize a rigged competition. So I will be giving her a rating of 1 for wisdom. For charisma, she is very unlikable due to there being next to nothing that's good about her in any way. I mean, most of the time she acts like she's actively trying to make people upset, and it sure as heck worked on me. I don't think that she is evil though, not Queen Scarlet evil, in fact not even close, but she's still pretty bad. So I think that 3 is a reasonable rating, or maybe even too generous honestly. In the last category for Magnificent is competence. Most of what I have to say has already been said, but yeah, she puts 0 effort into helping the Rainwings. In fact, she kinda just sits in her pavilion all day. She doesn't do any kind of managing at all. To be fair, the Rainwings at the time didn't really need that much managing, so she didn't have to do much. But again, with her not even trying to save the missing Rainwings tells us a lot. So for competence, Magnificent gets a 3. If we get the average of those ratings, we get a rather sad rating of 2.25, which places her close to the bottom of the D column. Alright, so now we are on to the Icewing, starting with Queen Glacier. So Glacier was the Icewing Queen during the War of Sandwing Succession and was responsible for allying the Icewings with Blaze. She is the mother of Queen Snowfall and Princesses Mink and Crystal. Before we get started, I would like to say that we don't actually know a ton about Queen Glacier, so a few assumptions will have to be made, but I think that we know enough about her for them to be reasonable. For fairness, we don't really know how she punishes dragons, but from what we see of her, she seems like a pretty reasonable dragon. I would have a hard time believing that she'd torture and kill dragons like Queen Scarlet or even Queen Coral would. Also, despite befriending Jerboa III, who is an animus, she never asked for her to use her magic. This goes to show how selfless Queen Glacier is. So I'm going to give Queen Glacier a 9. I'm only hesitant to give her a 10 because we don't know her whole story. There might be something else that I'm missing. Now we are on to Wisdom, so along with her coming off as a reasonable dragon, she also seems pretty wise. An example could be how when she talked to her daughters as she was dying and told them that Snowfall would become queen and that they must respect her decision. While it doesn't take a genius to know that problems would arise if the sisters started fighting over the throne, Glacier in this situation is thinking ahead past her own life and instead of giving up, trying to plan ahead for her daughters and making one last effort to improve her kingdom, which I respect that a lot. And going back back to her relationship with Jerboa, she also demonstrates empathy when she finds out Jerboa's curse by crying for her and recognizing how unfortunate and unfair it is to Jerboa. So I think that Glacier deserves a 10 for wisdom. She's very smart and empathetic and very clearly cares about her kingdom and her responsibilities. Now for charisma, this is probably the toughest category to judge because we simply don't know a lot. If I were to guess based on her character traits, her kingdom really respected her and trusted her, whether it be in war or just generally guiding the tribe to a better future. I don't think she's the kind of dragon you can just goof around with, but I think that's a good thing. You don't want an unproductive queen, but she also comes off as a queen that knows what she's doing and one that you can easily have faith in, which I think is great. However, she might come off as a bit intimidating to some, which could potentially be problematic, so I'm going to give her a solid 8. For competence, I feel like all that I need to say has already been said except for one thing. Now, this isn't necessarily Glacier's fault, more just the tribe's fault in general, but I feel like Glacier could have tried to improve the system of Ice Wings in order to increase overall happiness and self-esteem, mainly for royal dragonettes. The current system was full of rules and comparisons, and she didn't do anything about it that we know of. It was only until Snowfall that changes started to be made. With that being said, I think that Queen Glacier gets an 8 out of 10 for competence, and so now we will average out these ratings, and she gets an 8.75, ranking high in the A tier. Now that we have done Queen Glacier, we are going to move on to her daughter Snowfall. Snowfall inherited the throne during Arc 2 when Queen Glacier was killed by Darkstalker's plague, and she was the one chosen to be queen by Glacier out of the 3 princesses. Just to be clear, I'm going to be rating her based on her character after her arc in book 14, so this version of Snowfall isn't as paranoid or rude and is a bit more empathetic towards other dragons. So we are going to be starting with fairness, and I believe that Snowfall will be able to treat her subjects fairly. There will probably be the occasional rude encounter with her, but overall, after her arc, everything will probably be fine. And plus, she seems more confident in herself and is willing to make changes to the kingdom. She cares about her Ice Wings, and if there is anything that she can change for the better, she will. For example, she destroyed the Great Ice Cliff and the ranking system, which has been in place for thousands of years. This goes to show how much she cares about the kingdom and how she will use this opportunity as queen to do some good. So I will be giving Snowfall a solid 7.5. The reason it isn't higher is because I still think that she has much to learn, but that's okay because she's very young and was thrown into the situation. For wisdom, I'll be honest, Snowfall is still a bit impulsive and can definitely improve. However, she is far better than she was at the start of book 14. That Snowfall was extremely paranoid and seemed to have an extremely skewed view on reality. I think that Snowfall has the potential to be a very wise queen in the future, but the future isn't now. And right now, as of book 15, she is still improving, but still needs to improve more. As she communicates and works with other dragons from her tribe, she will continue to learn how they can help her kingdom. Of course, she learned that with the gift of vision, but there's always more to learn. I will give her a stronger rating than I would usually, simply because of how much she has improved as a queen and how this shows that she has the potential to improve even more. So I will give her an 8. In terms of charisma, I think that's where Snowfall is at her weakest. She's so much better than how she was at the start of book 14, but I still think that she has retained at least a little bit of an intense aura to her, as in, she doesn't seem like someone you would want to get mad. I'm sure she wouldn't harm her subjects, but I think she would do some shouting and intimidation. It is also important that we mention how she has a lot more faith in dragons now. This will certainly be beneficial for creating alliances with other tribes, because now, unlike the old Snowfall, she'll actually be compliant. I don't find her to be the friendliest dragon, but I do think that she has a lot of potential, so I will give her a 5 for the charisma category. In the final category, we have competence. We haven't seen a ton of how Snowfall is running the Ice Kingdom, but we have seen her make some monumental changes that I believe are for the better. The Great Ice Cliff will allow dragons from other tribes to interact with the Ice Wings more easily, and the removal of the ranking system will lead to higher self-esteem among the Ice Wings. Oh, if only Winter had lived during Snowfall's reign. And she also genuinely seems determined to be a good queen, which is obviously a good quality to have. Her ability to not be afraid of having changes in confidence leads me to believe that she will be a great queen, so I'm going to give her a rating of 8. So I'm going to average all these scores out, and Snowfall gets a 7.125, around the middle of B. Now we are moving on to Queen Moorhen, who is the only Mudwing queen that we have a decent amount of information on. As of book 15, she is still queen of the Mudwings, and she led them through the War of Sandwing Succession. We get the biggest impression on her when Sunny Dream visits her in the brightest night. Even though this is the Mudwing queen that we have the most information on, I will have to admit that quite a few educated guesses will have to be made as to how she runs her kingdom. So I think it's reasonable to think that she does care about her subjects, as she is having nightmares of siblings dying in an upcoming battle when Sunny Dream visits her. She is very clearly empathetic and caring towards her subjects, and especially siblings, as all Mudwings should, and she tries to do what is best for them. That includes holding off a battle and giving the Dragonets a chance to end the war, so that many dragon lives wouldn't have to be lost. Other than that, we don't really know much about Moorhen, and the guidebook doesn't give us too much information on her either. She gave me the impression that she is a tough queen, but she also cares about her subjects, so I will be giving her a solid 7. For wisdom, I'll go back to her holding off the battle and listening to Sunny. It's hard to say whether or not she thought this was the right decision or not, or if she just wanted to stop the battle, but regardless, it was wise for her to stop the battle and give the Dragonets of Destiny a chance. But it could also be argued that it isn't mature to trust Dragonets. So I will be giving her another 7 for wisdom. We don't know enough about her to give any strong ratings, but I also don't think it's fair to give her low ratings due to us not knowing much about her. So I think that this is a healthy balance. I think that Moorhen seems to be intimidating, but also a dragon that you would respect, similar to that of Grandeur or Glacier. She's likely to be perceived well, as Clay's siblings call her a good queen, so I think it's reasonable to say that that's the general consensus of the Mudwings. She also seems to be good at negotiating, as she was able to score an alliance with the Skywings and Burn during the war. With all of that in mind, I'm going to give her a solid 6 for charisma. She doesn't necessarily seem friendly, but she seems competent and like a dragon you'd respect. For competence, I'm going to generally be repeating what I have already said because it also applies here, but I'll keep it brief. I think that she is fairly confident, and she thinks and cares a lot about her subjects and makes smart decisions in order to keep them safe, and she also is able to secure beneficial alliances with other tribes. She also takes her job as queen very seriously and doesn't abuse her power, which I think is a very important trait to have. So I'm going to give her an 8.5 for competence. She seems like she does a pretty good job. Now that we have all those ratings, Queen Moorhen's average is 7.125, placing her roughly in the middle of B. Now we are moving on to the Sea Wings, and we are going to be looking at Queen Coral. Coral is Tsunami's mother, and she ran the Sea Wing Kingdom during the War of Sandwing Succession, and she is still queen as of the Flames of Hope. I would say that Coral is a bit complicated when it comes to how good of a queen she is, so this should be interesting. For fairness, I'll start by saying that Coral is not very merciful. We see that when Webbs comes back to the Summer Palace and asks for forgiveness, she doesn't even give him a chance and immediately starts planning his execution. She also sent his wife out to the front lines of the war, essentially killing her for assisting Webbs. Also, when Coral found out one of her female eggs had been destroyed in the hatchery, she brutally killed Tortoise, who was the dragon responsible for guarding the hatchery. While she did leave her post, she was told she could by Commander Shark, so is it really her fault? I personally don't think Tortoise deserved any kind of punishment because she was given permission. However, I do think it's reasonable for Coral to punish Webbs, but I think that an execution is far worse than he deserves. Perhaps just prison would suffice. But my point is that she really hates it when people wrong her personally, and she's kind of selfish. For example, if Webbs took a Sea Wing egg that wasn't hers, she wouldn't have cared despite there being some heartbroken Sea Wing parents out there. Overall, Coral is quite selfish and doesn't punish dragons fairly, so I will be giving her a 3.5. I don't think she is as bad as some other queens like Queen Scarlet, but she still isn't that fair at all. In terms of wisdom, I don't really get the feeling that Coral is particularly smart. That feeling goes even further when she just blindly agrees to whatever Blister thought was best, which ended up being her locking her own daughter up despite how much she cares about her. If she were wise, then she would have realized that she's being used. So I'm going to give Coral a 4 for wisdom. She isn't stupid, but she also needs to learn to think for herself and use some common sense. Now, it's hard to say for charisma because we don't really see how the Sea Wing Kingdom perceives her, but I don't think that it's bad, at least. In terms of the dragons she works closely with, they seem to genuinely respect her. Like Moray, for example, yeah, she is a bit unstable, but she genuinely seems to love Coral, even to the point of hating her daughters because they will eventually have to challenge her. And to me, at least, it never seemed like her subjects ever really feared for their life around her. or tried to hide when she was near. To me, Coral seems fine if you stay on her good side, which is why I will give her a 5. And the last category for Coral is competence, and I think she's fairly competent at her job. During the Lost Air, we get a good look at the Sea Wing Kingdom, and it seems to be functioning pretty effectively, actually. She also organized a council to stay up to date on all the major functions of the kingdom, which seem to be working well for her. The only concerning thing about how she runs her kingdom is her choices with the school curriculums, as she seems to prioritize her own writing instead of teaching Dragonets actual useful stuff. Perhaps her writing is a little bit educational, but I think it's also fair to say that there are better methods. I will be giving Coral an 8 for competence, as she runs the kingdom generally well. If we average these scores out, Queen Coral gets a rating of 5.125, which places her in the middle of C tier. Now we are moving on to Sandwings, and we are going to start with Burn. Burn is the oldest of the Sandwing sisters and is described as the largest, strongest, and best in combat. She is allied with the Mudwings and Skywings during the War of Sandwing Succession, and yes, I am aware that she, along with the other 2 Sandwing sisters, technically were never queen, but I'm going to make an exception for them. I think we know enough about them to decide whether or not they'd be good queens. We're starting off with fairness. So it is likely that she would have just continued the war if she became queen, and that obviously isn't fair to the Sandwings because they don't want to fight anymore. She's also just a very cruel dragon, so it is likely that she would have just killed any dragon who wronged her, including her own subjects. If I were a Sandwing, I'd be worried about making mistakes around her. To me, she just seems like Queen Scarlet with slightly more common sense and likes weirder things. So I'm going to be giving her a rating of 3. I don't think she's as evil as Blister, but she certainly doesn't care about other dragons, and if so, very few. For wisdom, Burn doesn't seem very smart. She might be good at thinking in the scenario of a battle, but I don't think that she can make good decisions as queen that isn't war related. So in conclusion, I think she'd make an effective war general, but not a good queen. So I'm going to give her another 3. For charisma, she's not great either for this category. Even in the prologue of book 1, you can already tell that she isn't a kind dragon and that she is very merciless. Any dragon loyal to her is likely loyal out of fear. She also openly disrespects her allies, which might have ended up having consequences at some point. So I'm going to give her a rating of 1 for charisma. A lot of what I have to say in the competence category was already said in wisdom and fairness, because a lot of competence comes down to making smart decisions and protecting her dragons. She would be fine with her Sandwings dying if it meant she could go to war with another tribe, but she also lacks the brains to make good decisions within her kingdom, if she even cared about it in the first place. So I'm going to give her a 3, only because she would be good in a war scenario, but incompetent in anything else. So if we add up these 4 ratings, Burn gets a score of 2.5, which places her in the D tier. Now onto the second Sandwing sister, Blister. She's the middle dragonet and isn't as good at fighting as Burn, but she's cunning, manipulative, and calculating. She is by far the most evil out of the 3 Sandwing sisters. For fairness, the first thing that comes to mind with Blister is how she'd just abuse her power as queen to complete any agenda that she might have. I don't think she'd be as cruel as Burn, but her overall impact on Pyria would be worse. She also likely would not want anyone to question her methods as queen and would punish anyone who did so. So I'm going to be giving her a rating of 4. I don't think she'd be horrible to her subjects, but she would likely be scheming something bad. Let's move on to the second category for Blister, which is wisdom. I don't think that wise is the word to describe Blister, but she definitely is smart, which is one of the main parts of being wise, I guess. She's intelligent and knowledgeable, but her problem is that she lacks empathy and isn't very disciplined. However, due to how smart she is, I'm going to give Blister a 7. Her bad qualities do bring her down a bit, but I think if you want to come up with an evil plan, Blister is the dragon for the job. Moving on to charisma, I think that she can be more charismatic if she wants to, mostly at least. When she's trying to be nice and friendly, like when we see in the Lost Air when the dragonets meet her, there's kind of an unsettling feeling or a fake feeling that comes off Blister. However, she can certainly charm her way to certain dragons like Queen Coral. That could be because Queen Coral is a bit gullible and lacks awareness, unlike the dragonets. So it is sometimes effective, so I'm going to give her a rating of 3. For competence, I think that Blister would be the most competent out of all the Sandwing sisters, but that's not a very high bar either. I think that she has the brains to make the kingdom the best that it could be, but she isn't interested in helping the Sandwings. She'd probably put her energy into something else. So perhaps she might not be the best queen, but overall with whatever endeavor she gets into, she seems to be fairly competent. In all her plans, she plays her part, and unfortunately for her, the dragons she works with end up disappointing her. I'm going to give her a 4 in terms of competence, not because she would necessarily be a good queen, but because if she wanted to, she could actually make some great changes. Now if we average out these scores, she gets a rating of 4.5, which is in the lower half of C tier. Now we are moving on to the last Sandwing sister, Blaze, and there isn't much to say about Blaze other than that she is the youngest of the sisters, has a huge ego, and is a complete idiot, is a selfish dragon, and would probably just be a horrible, incompetent queen. Again, since we haven't seen her as queen, I'm going to have to make a whole lot of assumptions, but I think that they're fair. So without further ado, I'm just gonna start bashing her because there isn't that much that's nice to say. She reminds me of Magnificent in a lot of ways, as in she probably will forget everything and she only cares about herself. She probably won't brutally slaughter dragons who wrong her because she described it as gross when Queen Glacier tore off a dragon's wing for her, but she would probably also be bad at giving dragons fair punishments. I also wouldn't be surprised if she broke some laws in the Sand Kingdom in order to get more treasure, to get more beautiful or something. So I'm going to give her a 4.5. I don't think she'd be terrible in terms of giving out punishments, but I think everything else would probably not be ideal for the Sandwings. For wisdom, I'm just going to get straight to the point. She is stupid and expects other dragons to do everything for her, which she learns is not the case, like when Glacier refuses to fight for her in the Arc 1 finale. I guess she is a bit knowledgeable because she knew about the cactus Sandwing poison antidote, which ended up saving Webs and Flame's lives, but I don't think that's very impressive since she's a Sandwing. I'd be concerned if she didn't know that. You could also probably compare her intelligence to that of a 2-year-old dragonette. She knows how to talk, and she knows basic knowledge, but she can't think critically and can't depend on herself for survival. So I'm going to have to give her a 2 for this. For charisma, it has been said multiple times during the first arc that the Sandwings generally do like Blaze more than the other sisters because of her friendliness and even just the fact that she isn't evil and out to kill everyone. And I agree with the Sandwings. I would totally prefer a dragon like Blaze even if she were a complete idiot to be the queen, because at least my life isn't threatened. However, it might be concerning if, for example, an invasion happened, but I will get to that in a second. I'm also a bit conflicted because I found Blaze very obnoxious in the Hidden Kingdom and didn't like her one bit, although her presence did feel much safer than the other 2 sisters, which is a plus. You know, I don't think Blaze is too bad in this category. All that holds her back is her stupidity and obnoxiousness, but it's not like she's as bad as the other sisters, so I'm going to give her a 6. Okay, now we are on to competence, and I'll start the section with what I briefly mentioned earlier, being if an invasion were to happen. I don't think the Sandwings should have to fear for their lives from their queen if it's Blaze, but unless Blaze has a very competent general that doesn't need the queen's assistance, they should be concerned if they were to be invaded because Blaze wouldn't have a strategy. She wouldn't be able to do anything. She wouldn't even try to protect them. She would probably do what she did during the war and just hide in a bunker until it's over, and she'd see her kingdom destroyed and many Sandwings dead after. Of course, that's just a hypothetical scenario, and since the war is over, who knows what might happen in the future. And I also doubt that Blaze has the brain capacity to run a kingdom because it's no easy task, especially such a large one. It's also likely that she'd be manipulated by other queens, just like how Queen Coral got manipulated by Blister. When it comes to Blaze, I feel like a million things could go wrong. So for competence, I'm going to give Blaze a 3. The reason why it's so high is because she might just be able to make it work if she has a lot of assistance with running the kingdom. And I mean a lot of assistance. So if we average out these scores, Blaze will get a rating of 3.875, which places her in the high D column. Now, we are moving on to the final Sandwing Queen, and fortunately this one is good. The Sandwings aren't getting completely screwed over. And she is the one and only Queen Thorn. Thorn was the Sandwing that the Dragonettes chose to be queen at the end of the Brightest Night, and we know that she is worthy to be a good queen because she wasn't dissolved by the Eye of Onyx. She used to be the leader of the Outclaws, and she is also Sunny's mother. Without further ado, let's get into the fairness category. So Thorn is probably up there with Queen Glory in terms of fairness. We can see that during her time in the Scorpion Den and the Outclaws, she took the time to take care of the dragons there while also not letting them take advantage of her. And Thorn has continued doing that after she became queen. I think she has that perfect balance of being tough to the point where dragons respect her, but also being a kind and compassionate queen. She also keeps her integrity by accepting Onyx's challenge for queen. While Onyx would most likely be a worse queen, Thorn knew that this is how the laws of the kingdom worked, and she respected that, despite her having the easy option of just rejecting the challenge. One thing I am on the fence about, however, is her decision to kill Prey Hunter. I get that she needs to act tough, especially in the Scorpion Den, in order to prove that she is a capable leader, but I don't think that was necessary. So I'm going to give her a 9 for fairness. The Prey Hunter execution is what was holding her back from a 10, but I can see where she was coming from when she made the decision. For the wisdom category, she has demonstrated wisdom many times throughout her pursuit of justice and peace throughout the series. An example could be how she was very wise to create the Outclaws, because she knew that it would be beneficial for the Scorpion Den to have some kind of law enforcement in order to keep dragons safe. And she also refuses to become corrupt and only does what is in the interest of the Sandwings, and just the whole dragon kind in general. And of course, she always stays calm and diplomatic when meeting other tribes. So with all that said, I'm going to give her Thorn a 10 for wisdom. Now in the charisma category, a lot of what I have to say was just said in wisdom, so I'll just cut right to the rating. I'm going to give her another 10 for charisma because she is calm, compassionate, and respects her dragons. And now the final category for Thorn is competence. I'm going to give her another 10 for multiple reasons. One is how she was able to make quick decisions in stressful times, like the sandstorm that Kibble summoned with Anemone's enchanted bracelets. She immediately helped all the dragons she could to get to shelter before it could hurt them, and she kept everyone calm and organized during it. The only issue I have with her is how she just scolded Kibble for summoning the storm. Kibble should have been demoted from advisor or some form of very harsh punishment, because that was honestly just really stupid of him, and the damage was monumental. Perhaps Thorn is sometimes a little bit too soft, at least to the dragons closest to her. Another example of her competence is how she was able to rescue Sunny with the Outclaws from Burns' stronghold in Book 5, despite there being many guards defending the place. So I'm going to be giving Thorn a 9 for competence. Overall, she's very competent, despite having a couple of small issues that she can improve upon. Alright, so now I'm going to average out these scores, and Thorn gets a rating of 9.5, easily cementing herself as one of the best Sandwing Queens ever. Now we are moving on to the Nightwing Queens, and the first of the two that we will be looking at is Queen Battlewinner. Battlewinner was the Nightwing Queen during the first arc up until the Dark Secret when the Nightwing Island's volcano erupted. A few years earlier, she got hit in the mouth with frost breath and her insides were freezing, so she jumped into lava and ended up saving herself. So she stayed in a cauldron of lava, communicating with her subjects through her daughter Greatness, so she's actually very unique compared to the other queens that we're looking at, although she will be a bit difficult to judge as we don't really see much of her being a queen due to her incident. I think that it's safe to say that she cares very much about her tribe, but she is also not very merciful. An example of her being a little bit harsh with her punishments is during the Dark Secret when she tells the Nightwings to throw Vengeance into the lava because he kidnapped Glory when he wasn't supposed to. Of course, he wasn't following orders, but I don't think that death was a fair punishment at all. It is far too harsh. Perhaps he could have just been thrown into the dungeon. That would have been more reasonable. Other than that, we don't really see too much selfishness or cruelty from her at all. I guess one problem about her could be that she's still insisting on being queen despite her injury. Surely she knew that would negatively impact the tribe, right? If they didn't have a proper queen that could do normal things like any dragon. Although, we don't know if that's her fault or not, because perhaps there just wasn't a dragon fit for a queen. Greatness sure wasn't. So with all that considered, I'm going to give her a 3. She's a bit unfair with her punishments, but she never really has the chance to prove herself as a fair queen. In terms of wisdom, I don't think that's her strong suit. For one, she literally jumped out of the cauldron in order to get Glory despite knowing that she would die. Perhaps she just didn't care, since she knew that she would die regardless. And also, I don't think her plan with Moros here with the prophecy and getting to the rainforest was very smart at all. Getting to the rainforest could have just been one mission and then it could have been done. It didn't have to be a whole crazy plan involving the whole world. I'll just say that I don't think it was necessary. And that's really all I can say in terms of wisdom, so I will give her a 6. I will give her credit with coming up with such an intricate plan with Moros here. It's just the problem is that it wasn't necessary. As for how charismatic she is, well, she seems to be a rather grumpy dragon and doesn't like talking to anyone. I think that's both because of her ice-covered throat and her just not being a pleasant dragon. I don't think there's much else to say for this category, so I'm going to give her a 2 for charisma. For competence, it's a bit complex. While it's not her fault that she has to stay in a cauldron and can't move anywhere, and therefore hardly do anything, I think if she were a competent queen, she would have recognized that she can't keep doing this and given up her throne to someone else. I will give her some credit for even coming up with a plan to get the Nightwings off the island. It shows that she at least somewhat cares about the tribe and that she is taking action. Except, as I said before, I don't think the plan was great, so this doesn't show much competence, but at least she tried. With all that said, I will give her a rating of 3 for competence. I think she could have done much better if she weren't held back by the fact that she would die if she stepped out of lava, so I'm going to average out all these ratings, and that gives her a 3.5, high in the D column. The second and final Nightwing that we are going to be analyzing is Queen Vigilance. She was the queen during Darkstalker's time, and she is known to be intimidating and speaking very little. She is also very paranoid of the dragons around her, which led to her often hiring assassins to kill dragons that she thought could become or are already threats, just like she did with Darkstalker. Starting with fairness, she doesn't seem like a particularly cruel or barbaric queen, but she is also very suspicious of dragons and is constantly making unfair assumptions. She also generally doesn't seem to care that much about the feelings of others. An example of this was when she discovered Clearsight's unique abilities, and she immediately moved her into the palace to study the future and give her an unrealistic amount of information. It was very clearly taking a toll on Clearsight, but she didn't seem to care. And she also does a similar thing with Darkstalker and Arctic, which is using them for their animus power. We also see her unfairly assuming that Darkstalker was a threat to her, which is why she sent Quickstrike to kill him. While it is true that Darkstalker would end up trying to overthrow her, it was far too early to reasonably make that assumption, and it could be argued that that assassination attempt was one of the main factors that led him down that path. All in all, we can see that the queen's paranoia is to the detriment of her. How she treats her regular subjects, we don't really know, so we just have to go off this, so I'm going to give her a 4. She isn't the worst, but she does have some problems. Now we are on to wisdom. Due to her high levels of paranoia and disregard for other dragons, that leads me to believe that she likely isn't the smartest dragon either, and therefore not the most wise. I mean, she definitely isn't stupid because she was running the Nightwing Kingdom, one of the most advanced kingdoms in history, for over 40 years. But her poor decisions are part of what caused Darkstalker to, for lack of a better term, go crazy. As I said earlier, she doesn't treat her subjects, Clearsight, in the best manner, which makes me think that she lacks some empathy. So I'm going to give her a 6. I will give her the benefit of the doubt with this one and say that she is at least a bit intelligent, because once again the Nightwing Kingdom was prospering when she was queen. She must have been doing something right. For charisma, I already mentioned this, but she is a very intimidating queen and takes amusement out of making her inferiors uncomfortable, so I think it's safe to say that she isn't the most charismatic queen. In fact, it's almost like she's trying to be the opposite of charismatic based on the way she acts around her subjects, so I'm going to give her a 3. I don't think you need to fear for your life around her, but you certainly won't be comfortable. Now for the final category, competence. Now a lot of this does connect to wisdom, so I'm just going to briefly go over my thoughts again. She is smart enough to the point where she is able to run the kingdom successfully even during the middle of the war with the Ice Wings, and I bet sometimes her paranoia did pay off, but I'm also sure that a lot of the time it didn't, so much so that it ended up harming the kingdom like what she did with Darkstalker. I think that she would have just been another decent queen carrying the torch of the Nightwing Kingdom into the future if Darkstalker had never come around. So with all that said, I'm going to give her a rating of 7, mainly because of how well she runs the kingdom. And now we're going to average out the scores, and she gets a rating of 5, right in the middle of C tier. We are now on to Pantalan tribes, starting with the Silkwings, and there's really only one queen that we have information on, and that is Queen Monarch. Fortunately, we actually got quite a lot of insight about her character in the Guide to the Dragon World, because there was a section of what appears to be a journal entry of hers. It's a very interesting argument for whether or not Monarch was a good queen or not, because she wanted the best for her tribe, but it could be argued that she made some poor decisions, or perhaps those poor decisions were actually good. Once again, we're starting with fairness for Monarch. Out of all the categories, this is the hardest to say for Monarch, but in her journal, we can see that she cares about the Silkwings very, very much. If she cares about the tribe as much as the guidebook says, then I think it's fair to assume that she at least tries to be as fair as possible with her subjects, because she wants what's best for them. And she is also likely open to feedback as well, because she herself even started doubting herself and wondering if she made the right decision about giving the Silkwings to Wasp. Based on all the evidence, I will be giving Monarch an 8. It is possible that she deserves higher, there just isn't enough to go off of to warrant such a high score. In terms of how wise she is, it depends on who you ask. The main thing that Monarch did and is known for was giving the Silkwings to Wasp, and whether or not that was the right move could be a whole different video. So I'm just going to try and touch on it briefly. I think that she made the right choice because then it is likely that the Silkwings would have ended up like the Leafwings and been driven nearly or completely to extinction by the Hivewings. In fact, since the Silkwings have fewer natural defenses, they would be in even more danger. Remember, this is just the very basics of what I think of the situation. It is far deeper than that, but I hope you get the main idea. Monarch also, as I said before, cared about her tribe very much, so she put a lot of time and effort into thinking about what the right decision for her tribe was. All in all, I think that surrendering to Wasp was a wise decision. While far from ideal, the Silkwings were definitely in better shape than the Leafwings as of the events of Arc 3. I honestly feel kinda bad for her being put in a situation like that. It's like a lose-lose, but one loss is worse than the other. In Monarch's journal, she also seemed to have been kind of like the peacekeeper within the trio of queens because the other two were constantly arguing, which gives me a sense of wisdom from her as well. This might be controversial, but in terms of wisdom, I will give Monarch a 9. I think she made the right decision by prioritizing the Silkwing safety, which I think is a very important and wise thing to do. I guess the only problem she might have is having a bit too much faith in other dragons in the Book of Clearsight. For how charismatic she is, we don't really ever see her interacting with other dragons in the series, I don't believe. As in, we never see exact dialogue, we only see her thoughts, so it's hard to judge how likable she is. But based on her journal, she seems nice and compassionate, so I'll just give her an 8. I think that's fair considering everything we know. And for how competent Monarch is, that's certainly a question. As I said before, I think her decision to hand over the Silkwings was in fact a good decision. She was put in a very tough and unfortunate situation. I think she handled it the best she could, which leads me to believe that she would have also been very competent if this whole situation didn't happen and she had more time to be queen. Once again, I can't give her anything over an 8 since we don't have much to go off of. Alright, so if we average all these scores out, we get 8.25, which is low A tier. It's rather unfortunate that Monarch hardly got a chance to continue the trend of Queen Monarch being great queens, because I'm sure she would have done great. She was just queen at probably the worst time possible. Now we are moving on to the Hivewings, and the only Hivewing queen that we can analyze is Queen Wasp. Queen Wasp is probably one of the most important queens in the history of Wings of Fire, not just Pantala, but just in the series in general. She brought the Silkwings and Hivewings together by lying about the contents in the Book of Clearsight and started the Tree Wars. She's also the first and hopefully only queen to gain mind control over her subjects now that the Breath of Evil is gone. She has a lot of things she might not want to put in her resume. So for fairness, Queen Wasp is probably the least fair queen in this entire list. She's really awful, and that's still an understatement. For one, she mind controls the Hivewings and forces them to do stuff that they probably don't want to do, and even if they did want to do it, it's not fair for her to have access to them whenever she pleases. And shockingly, it's just as bad or potentially even worse for the Silkwings than for the Hivewings. She locks up all the Flame Silks and forces them to produce Flame Silk for the hives, and that's not even mentioning just the oppressive and tyrannical nature of the Kingdom Wasp runs. In fact, I did a whole video about the injustices of Queen Wasp and the Hivewings, so feel free to check that out if you want. And she also abused the Book of Clearsight and lied about its contents to get her way. The unfortunate part is that all of this is just scratching the surface. I don't think much more needs to be said. In fact, she's so unbelievably awful that I'm going to give her a -1. I probably should have suited the rating system for Queen Wasp, but I feel like this drives the point home better that Wasp was just so bad. Now, I don't think that the main characteristic I would describe Wasp with is wise, but she definitely isn't stupid. She's like Blister in a way, as in she's smart but very evil. A stupid queen wouldn't have been able to accomplish or maintain what Wasp had. But also a part of wisdom are things like empathy, and I think it's safe to say that Wasp does not have any of that. But I will give her due credit for her intelligence, which is why she gets a 3. In terms of charisma, we don't see her personality that much in the series. The little that we do see is it's pretty nasty. She also feels really far and distant from the rest of the kingdom, as in she doesn't really interact with her subjects that much. She's kind of just above that, or at least that's the impression impression that I get. But Monarch also mentions in her section of the guidebook how Wasp would come and visit her specifically and give her updates on the Silkwings, which could be interpreted as a good sign. Since there isn't much to go off here, I'm just going to give her a 1. And the final category is competence. For Wasp specifically, I think we need to go over each criteria in order to get a good idea of what rating to give her, because she was good in some aspects and bad in others. So how well does she run her kingdom? Well, it depends on which perspective you look at it from. Generally, I would say that the kingdom functions as intended and all their subjects do have some kind of purpose and are productive. And the quality of life also must be at least moderate, because the hives are some of the most advanced civilizations in the history of both Pantala and Puria. Queen Wasp is also very successful in war, as she nearly drove the Leafwings to extinction. Of course, we don't want a queen that's committing mass genocide, but it is a good thing that Wasp has the skills and abilities to defend herself and stay safe. So with that considered, I will give her a 4. The only thing holding her back is how poorly she treats her subjects, but regarding all the other aspects, she's actually quite good, honestly. If we average out these scores, we get an average of 1.75 in F tier. I would not want Wasp to be my queen, and it's a shame because I think Wasp has the intelligence and skills to be a good queen. She just decides to use this thing toward evil. Now we are moving on to our final tribe and final queen, who is Queen Sequoia of the Leafwings, or Sapwings more specifically. She was the queen during the Tree Wars and continued to be queen throughout the events of Arc 3 up until the Poison Jungle, when she got affected by the Breath of Evil and Hazel became queen. We don't know too much about her, but in the guidebook there is a section where she exchanges various letters with her general and Belladonna, and it gives us some insight into what she was like. She also would get into fights with Wasp during the Queen meetings, and she refused to give the Leafwings to the Hivewings, which started the Tree Wars. Also, regarding her personality during the Tree Wars, she was actually a rather angry dragon, but after she saw how much of her tribe was killed, she found ways to become the calmer and more tranquil dragon we see in Book 13. We will be judging her based on how she is in Book 13 and the guidebook, which don't contradict each other. So we will be judging her based on what she's like in Book 13. So let's start with fairness. So this category is a little bit tough to judge because we don't really see much of how she actually manages this half-winged village, but we do see that she is a kind and respectful and approachable leader, so I would assume that she treats her Leafwings the same. Another thing worth mentioning is how, despite the Poison Wings splitting off from her, she still sends them things like food and always tries to keep in touch with them. She still believes that they are part of her tribe, therefore she still wants to help them. But of course we don't know how much Sequoia acted during the Tree Wars. Maybe she wasn't so good because, as I said, she was different back then, but based on what we know, I think 8 is a fair rating for what she's like now. In terms of wisdom, Sequoia after the Tree Wars took a very cautious and smart approach to protect the Leafwings. This shows wisdom because she learned from her past mistakes in order to help bring the tribe back to what it used to be. She recognized that she was too angry of a dragon and found ways to calm herself down in situations of stress in order to handle it more rationally. Her recognizing her flaws and improving was a very wise and respectable thing of her to do. I also respect her decision to not give in to the Hivewings, even if it were detrimental to her tribe. She asked to see the Book of Clear Sight in order to believe it, but upon Wasp's refusal, she stood her ground. I think she was very smart to question Wasp's claims. Also, similar to Grandeur, she kind of comes off as an old wise dragon that is calm and intelligent, so I'm going to give her a 9 for wisdom. Moving on to charisma, the Leafwings, apart from the Poison Wings, seem to actually like her a lot, even after the Tree Wars. It's hard to say whether or not they would have liked her back when she had a more hostile personality, but she had their respect while they were in hiding. I know that I said I would judge her based on Book 13, but I think this is a bit too crucial to ignore. Wasp and her definitely didn't get along well, which could have been a potential cause for the Tree Wars. Perhaps she accidentally gave Wasp the motivation to go through with her lie, and if she had just been a bit more patient with Wasp during their disagreements, things would have turned out for the better. And speaking of her getting angry during the 13th book, I would find it a bit uncomfortable whenever she had to calm herself down with her deep breaths. While she's trying to stay calm, it also makes her come off as a bit unstable. So with all that said, I think I'm going to give her a 6. Moving on to competence, I don't think that Sequoia was the most competent queen in the world, to be honest. She did what she thought was best, but leading the Leafwings into war against the Hivewings probably wasn't the smartest move. We don't know what the numbers looked like in terms of sides of the battle, but I think if the Leafwings got crushed as hard as they did, then it probably wasn't a smart move to go to war, and that going to war would obviously be very consequential. If I were her, I would have had the Leafwings disappear into the poison jungle before anything happened. But on the other Talon, she did manage to create an entire village in the poison jungle, which is probably just as hard to live in as the Nightwing Island. It seems that Sequoia is good at certain things and needs improvement for others, so I will be giving her a 6 for competence. And with all that said, if we average out her ratings, we get a 7.25, which solidly places her in the B column. So that just about wraps up this video, so here is the final version of the tier list. And I guess this means that Glory is the best queen in Wings of Fire and Wasp is the worst. Now obviously this is based on my judgment, so you might disagree. And I guess this also answers the question of which Sandwing Queen the Dragonets of Destiny should have chosen if they literally had no other choice. While I hate Blister as much as the person next door, I guess she's the best option. Perhaps not for the entirety of Pyria, but maybe at least for just the Sandwings. I will say that I did not expect for this video to be this long. I thought it'd be, you know, maybe around 20 minutes or so, maybe? But clearly that didn't end up happening, so if you watched all the way to the end, thank you so much, I appreciate it. So I hope you have a great day, and once again, thank you for watching.